Have you ever felt like it was your role in life to suffer? Everywhere you go, you will hear people sharing stories of their suffering, like, I can't believe he cheated on me. My arthritis is acting up horribly today. I wish someone would just shoot me and put me out of my misery. And this has been the worst day of my life. Suffering is a common outcome of the human condition. As souls here in physical bodies, learning about how to come back to our true nature of peace and ease, pain can be a very useful tool to know when something is out of alignment so that we can then course correct. However, it can become difficult to detach from the pain if we identify it as our lot in life. This is what happens when we take on the role of the martyr. I was raised to believe that suffering was expected of me, that it was my job not only to suffer, but to suffer deeply, horribly, terribly, and endlessly. Now, it's true that nobody actually sat me down and said, Cynthia, your job in life is to suffer. But they might as well have, because that was the message I received each and every day of my life. My grandmother suffered in seething anger and this tight-lipped coldness. My great aunts suffered verbally, vocally, complaining incessantly about dozens of physical ailments. My father suffered in a silence numbed by alcohol. My mother suffered loudly, bitterly. My uncle suffered in an angry, brooding depression. My aunt suffered with this air of quiet dignity and sadness. My older siblings suffered sullenly with dry-eyed resignation, and my baby brother suffered anxiously. Only a couple of my extended family members ever actually demonstrated any level of peace. My dad's stepmom, my mom, was the practical, no-nonsense type who suffered very stoically. But she had a cheerful expression. She lost her own children when her 6-year-old twin boys drowned after chasing a hoop onto some thin ice. She would scold me and my siblings repeatedly every time we visited her for putting our hands on her walls, which were covered with this sort of velvet raised wallpaper design. Not very child-friendly. But her words lacked anger, which made her home feel like a safe haven. It was a shame-free environment. Less frequent, but best of all treats, were visits to my great Auntie Anne. Auntie Anne would always smile gently and kindly when she served ginger ale and cookies. Out of my entire family, Auntie Anne was the only person who didn't radiate pain, although she sometimes told stories of her sister, my grandmother Sarah, who had died when my father was 10. I recall visits to Auntie Anne's home like feeling the warmth of the sun coming out from behind the clouds on a cold and dreary day. When I was exploring all of my various subpersonalities, I had the awareness that, like a sponge, I had taken on the role of the martyr in every way that had been modeled for me. My inner critic had my grandmother's dirty look and cold shoulder down pat. My sarcastic sin had my mother's bitterness and biting tongue. My avoider had a combo of my father's numb silence, my uncle's depression, and my aunt's sadness. My perfectionist had a combo of my mother's and my grandmother's critical anger. My drama queen had my great aunt's flair for vocal, dramatic complaining. My scaredy cat shared my little brother's anxiety. Every one of these aspects took their suffering as their due. In each of these roles, I seriously thought that I deserved whatever pain and misery I was experiencing. Once I was able to view all of these parts of myself with a level of neutrality, I came to see that I had bought into a belief that I needed to be perpetually punished, and that in some twisted way, I was somehow measuring my worth by how much I suffered. In other words, the harsher my suffering, the better I felt about myself. I can remember my sophomore year in art school. There I was working 3 jobs before, between, and after classes, struggling to pay my rent and purchase art supplies. And I can recall initially feeling so jealous of my classmates, most of whom didn't have to work because they received income from their families. It felt so bad and so unfair that in my mind, I convinced myself that I was somehow better than them because I earned my own way. I began to view my struggle as this kind of badge of courage, that thinking that the harder it was for me to get by, the more proof I had to show people how hard I worked and how much pain and suffering I could endure. I carried this attitude through the next decade until I ended up twice divorced, sick, broke, and practically homeless with 3 small children to support. The martyr inside of me was having a field day, dramatically complaining to anyone who would listen. See, look at how hard my life is. Do you see how much I'm suffering? As if there were some sort of special award, like an Oscar, that would go to the hardest working mother in a real life drama. There was this unspoken question: have I proved how much I can suffer yet? The minute I recognized the role that I'd been unconsciously playing, I decided to just drop all suffering and choose peace instead. Is there any aspect of your own personality that is playing the role of the martyr? Do you have any patterns of suffering or a need to prove how much pain you've endured? The truth is that peace is your birthright. You were born to live in joy, light, and laughter, not pain, misery, and darkness. The moment you recognize this martyr patterning, you have the power to have mercy on yourself, to drop the role of perpetual sufferer and move into the peace and the joy of the loving. Say, I now drop any old patterns of suffering and move into peace. Action step. Identify old patterns of suffering and choose to let these go in favor of healthier, more supportive behaviors. Declaration. I am now dropping the role of the martyr. I now view my pain as a learning opportunity rather than my lot in life. And I joyfully move out of suffering into the peace of the loving. And breathe that in. Many blessings of joy and vibrant freedom.